You know what's one big thing I look for in a presidential candidate? Someone who cares about the climate and has a plan to do something about it. Because I think the amount this gets covered is too little in comparison to what it can do to humanity. Honestly, we don't talk about it enough. Let's be honest, if something feels like it has consequences in the future, it's hard to care about it. I mean, heck, the people it's mostly going to affect are people a few generations or so after us. Why should we make sacrifices to ensure their well-being? And the reality of it is, I personally feel like some people deny climate change just because it's easier to live with. And I know it sounds like a stupid reason and no one is ever going to admit it, but surely that would make it at least a little easier to be on the side of climate skepticism. I sure know that's how I felt a long time ago. Not saying there was a time I denied climate change, but the thought of it possibly being fake made me sleep better at night. But the thing is, we can't really wait much longer. The sooner we start making major changes to clean ourselves up, the better. But anyway, all that talk has gotten me thirsty for some friends with science. More like enemies of science, honestly.
You won't die from climate change. Here's why.
It's hard to say if you'll die from climate change. Like I said, it'll affect more so the generations after us, but that also depends. If you live in a third world country, you'll definitely be affected by it a lot more than those that live in developed nations. That's kind of sad, isn't it? I've said it before, but the heaviest polluters are going to be the last to be affected by climate change, while the poorest countries will be the first. That's why even if there are many severe consequences today or in the future, we're still going to have people in developed nations such as the United States denying climate change, because they simply don't feel it yet. But yeah, you can't always say definitively if a person's death was caused by climate change because it wouldn't affect people directly. Usually it first hits something like ocean temperatures or a source of food first before it has downstream effects, which then could kill people.
The media often reports stories intended to scare people about the possible effects of climate change.
Okay, yes, some of the things the media says can often be exaggerated or misleading, which is why for such a sensitive topic, you shouldn't get your news from the media, especially if they have a history of being biased. Rather, get your information from reliable sources, such as scientific publications or climate scientists. I'm going to sidetrack a bit, but it's very interesting if you think about what these deniers say on why people started the idea of climate change to begin with. Honestly, if it were fake, I would see no reason or incentive on why scientists would lie about it to begin with. And if they're, quote, being paid the big bucks, then why would anyone want to pay them? I mean, on the other side of things, there are huge incentives for oil companies to put money into creating a case against man-made climate change, and they've done exactly that.
Some of these stories are based on the statements of scientists who should know what they're talking about, but in fact are relying on mistaken information.
Oh, okay, so basically you're saying that these scientists, who by the way dedicated their entire lives into studying climate, are just reaching conclusions based on misleading information. Fantastic. Way to undermine an entire field of science, by the way. Honestly, no one else could do something so crazy except for climate change skeptics. But you gotta do what you gotta do, otherwise you wouldn't be able to spread your propaganda.
The purpose of this note is to explain in relatively simple terms why people should not be frightened.
I don't think people should be frightened, but they definitely should be aware and try to move in the right direction. That means, for example, switching to clean energy yourself, or something bigger, like electing a president that will actually do something about this.
The global climate has been changing for billions of years, as long as the Earth has existed. Climate change is driven by dozens of natural influences, including solar cycles, the relationship between the oceans and the atmosphere, clouds, aerosols in the atmosphere, land and water disturbances, and the presence in the atmosphere of certain gases.
I don't understand how climate change skeptics can keep using this argument despite it being debunked over and over again. Yes, of course the Earth's climate goes through natural changes. Even before humans arrived on Earth, the climate has changed to extreme points. That being said, although the process of changing is the same here, right now we are seeing an increase in temperature like never before. It's important to step back and think about this scientifically. When Earth goes through natural heating, it does so over the course of thousands and millions of years. Meanwhile, right now, we are seeing some incredible heating in just centuries and decades. And the thing is, if the Earth's climate changes slowly, that won't be too much of an issue. Sure, it will change wildlife, but they will have time to adapt and undergo natural selection. But if the time frame is too short, that's not happening, and we'll see mass extinctions and great changes in ecosystems. And that's piled on top of many consequences, such as ocean acidification and more frequent natural disasters due to rising ocean temperatures. Now, the thing is, we can't really reverse global warming either, because the Earth's climate works in a positive feedback loop, where any small changes in temperature will cause certain events to happen, which causes more changes in temperature. I'm sure you've all learned this in your high school classes. That means reversing climate change takes more than just stopping the emission of CO2, which is why it is unrealistic. Rather, we should be focused on slowing down global warming. But seeing what other countries are doing these past few years, we may as well just dig our grandson's grave right now.
One of the gases is carbon dioxide, which is present in trace amounts of just over 400 parts per million.
That's not trace amounts. Sounds like it's not a lot, but you have to put things into context. And it's so weird. Back when I was in high school, we were learning about climate change and we were talking about, oh no, we're about to pass 400 parts per million. That's going to be a milestone. And now we've been over 400 for so long and it's just like, okay. The Earth is now somewhere at 410 ppm and that's not considered little. It's enough to get the Earth rolling into a positive feedback loop of warming. The climate is sensitive to change and we're already pushing it over.
The claims that the world may be dangerously warming are based on the view that human-caused carbon dioxide emissions have a larger effect than all the other sources of natural climate variability.
We don't necessarily have a larger effect because some natural events can cause a lot of warming at once, but that doesn't mean we're not a cause. We're pushing the Earth into a positive feedback loop which will continuously warm up the climate until it bounces back into the future. It's not a competition. Like if a murderer comes up to another murderer and one has killed 10 and the other has killed 15 people, that doesn't make the murderer that killed less people any better.
There are many reasons why this theory is false. Fundamentally, there are no empirical data, proof, that carbon dioxide has been or ever will be one of the main drivers of climate change.
I don't understand how you can just casually make that claim and not even stutter a single time.
Global temperatures have risen and fallen for millions of years in ways totally unrelated to human emissions.
You even said it yourself, per millions of years. Oh, the irony, we don't even see it.
Which only began to increase significantly in the middle of the 19th century. Average global temperatures were as high or higher than they are today 1,000, 1,500, and 2,000 years ago.
Let's hear proof of that because that's pretty bogus.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, an international organization formed around 1990, was mandated by governments to examine the climate exclusively in terms of human influence. The actual trends in temperature show no reason to believe that the climate is changing in harmful ways.
Ah yes, the classic make up false information on what a climate organization said and twist it to fit your narrative. Wait a minute, just earlier in the video you said that scientists are using faulty data. Huh? So what is it? Can we trust scientists or can we not trust scientists? You gotta be a little more consistent here, enemies of science. Anyway, this flat out lie about the IPCC really boils my blood. They have stated and confirmed repeatedly on the consequences of climate change and what will happen if we do not stop it. In fact, they've actually received criticism from numerous scientists for even underestimating these climate change effects.
The alarm comes from the way the IPCC forecasts future temperatures. It does so by using a series of mathematical models, simulations. The IPCC assumes incorrectly that the models it uses to project future climates are based on a perfect knowledge. And they're not.
Two things. First of all, the IPCC does not conduct research themselves. Rather, they gather thousands of publications and interpret them collectively to produce their reports. Second of all, don't underestimate computer models. They're incredibly powerful and can tell us so many things about reality and future projections. AI and computer models are present everywhere, from healthcare, research, websites, and even advertisements. You can't just go around undermining this technology because we wouldn't be living the lives we have if it weren't for the computer models. What is the difference in climate change? Do you even know and understand the models that climate scientists use? I mean, I could understand your argument if you were a PhD scientist yourself and you're claiming that computers are ineffective, because at least you've been exposed to them and you worked with them, but you're just some person on the internet who most likely hasn't even read a science textbook.
Whenever you read a story about how we're headed toward catastrophe if we continue living business as usual, meaning if we do not sharply slash carbon dioxide emissions, the reports are almost always referring to one of the IPCC scenarios called Representative Concentration Pathway 8.5, or RCP 8.5. What you will not be told is that RCP 8.5 is an implausible worst-case scenario that was never meant to represent a likely outcome.
The representative concentration pathway is a projection of possible future outcomes depending on what we decide to do with carbon emissions. For each possible outcome, a number is assigned. Now, 8.5 is the most extreme outcome and assumes that carbon emissions continue to accelerate. But yes, it is considered not to be a likely outcome. However, what enemies of science is not telling you is that there are plenty of other projections that are much more likely. Again, just because a murderer killed more people does not make the other murderer less guilty. The other projections, such as 4.5 and 6, are much more likely and is honestly the path we seem to be following. These predict a temperature increase of anywhere between 1.5 to 3 degrees. Be mindful that these projections don't say too much about the consequences of each pathway, so if certain news outlets are using RCP 8.5 as a way to scare people, well, that would mostly be their own deduction. Of course, just because the consequences are not the main purpose of the RCP does not mean they don't exist, because they very well do. A 2-degree increase in temperatures would mean greater storms, rising sea levels, destructions of ecosystems, spreading of diseases, wildfires, you name it. Sure, it may not seem like a lot, but the science is clear.
You will also not be told that scientists have been severely criticizing the use of RCP 8.5 as a predictor of doom.
I honestly just don't get it. Whose side are you on? You undermine scientists, but use the IPCC claim, which you made up by the way, of the climate not changing in harmful ways. Oh, but now you're undermining the IPCC and claiming that their model is bad and trusting the scientists that criticize it. You literally flip positions so often I can't even keep up. And that makes me just want to end the video here. This is part 1, I might do a part 2 later. Thank you to Fireshard, Liam, Alan Morton, and Jayan. I hope you have a good weekend.